It's clear that the United States was not prepared for a prolonged war. The approach, the idea of Israel and the United States was a one-day regime change. They were not prepared for a war. They were not prepared for Iran to be able to retaliate. And so the whole premise of what the United States and Israel did on February 28th was proven to be false. Since that day, it's been clear that the United States has no sensible position. The United States should just leave this terrible mistake, because if the U.S. escalates, it will lead to a massively destructive regional war in which everybody will lose. And therefore, escalation is no option. And the U.S. has no ability to enforce its demands. So this has been clear since the second day when the operation of the U.S. and Israel failed to achieve what they thought they were going to achieve. Let me say that the whole premise of Israel and the United States, that they would topple the Iranian government in one day and take control, was a reckless, illegal, immoral, and ultimately stupid idea. And that has been clear since March 1st. It's been clear since February 28th. Trump should just leave, period. I personally don't even believe in negotiations right now. I just believe Trump should leave. All the long-term issues, they can be faced in the long term. But right now, the blockade should be lifted, the strait should be opened up, and we should return to the situation before this absolutely crazy war was launched. And again, they didn't want a war. They thought this was a one-day operation.
I agree with Professor Sachs. I think that this was a major miscalculation. In general, from my understanding, perhaps Professor Sachs would correct me if I'm wrong, is that the United States has created this narrative on Iran that goes back to Orientalism and even before the United States ever became a power, but an Orientalist mindset that exists among Western elites and exists among American elites, those in power, that underestimates and as a result, they look down upon their designated adversaries. And as a result, they pursue policies with imagining that these narratives are correct, that their designated adversary is corrupt, that it's incompetent, incapable, unfit to rule, that if it's despotic, they're not sophisticated, and of course, unpopular. So when they devise policies based upon these assumptions, they expect immediate results, a one-day war, as Professor Sachs pointed out. But then when they hit reality, they immediately fail. Those policies fail. But the problem is that the narrative is so powerful that they don't, as a result of their failure, they don't learn from them. They don't learn from any of those failures, and they continue to pursue the same sort of policies in the hope that next time they'll get it done. And they always justify the reasons for their failure for some mistaken tactic or some mistake on their part, but their understanding of their opponent, of their enemy, of their designated adversary is the real problem, and they don't recognize that. It's completely warped. And so right now, I believe that Trump thinks that he can and the people around him think that, well, Iran is of course evil, and Iran is unstable. It is a regime, as they love to call it, and that if it didn't work militarily, well, we will use siege warfare to destroy them and bring them down. Ultimately, they'll collapse because it's a regime, and the regime is essentially, by nature, it is unstable. It's not going to last anyway. So all we have to do is just find the correct way to push it, and it collapses. But the reality is that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a state with very strong institutions. It is a sophisticated society. It is a sophisticated elite and leadership. It is a competent military, and it has a popular legitimacy, and thus that makes it a very formidable enemy if someone chooses to designate it as an enemy. And that is why I think that regardless of what the United States does, it's destined to failure. It may harm the Iranians in significant ways through war, where thousands die, or through sanction warfare, where people lose their jobs and people in hospitals die. But ultimately, even though it may cause great harm to the society, but the country will not submit. It will not collapse. And so until the United States is forced to retreat, in my opinion, through the economic hardship that is approaching us due to the shortage of energy across the world, or for whatever other reason, if people in the White House listen to sane people like Professor Sachs, which I don't think is really an option for them, the only solution in any case will be for the United States to pull back.
Okay, here's the next question, Mr. Sachs. From an economic standpoint, the Strait of Hormuz is the most vital energy checkpoint. And now the conditions has changed in this checkpoint. What are the long-term irreversible consequences for the global supply chain, and can the Western financial architecture survive a prolonged disruption here?
Well, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz is bad for just about everybody. Maybe if you are an independent oil company somewhere in the world, you benefit from the higher prices. But for the world as a whole, which needs the energy, which is now in short supply, this is a very heavy cost. And it's a heavy cost inside the United States, where people are extremely unhappy, where Trump's approval rating is in steep decline, where an American election is coming up in which the president will lose control over at least one house of the U.S. Congress, assuming that they count the votes honestly. But this pain is being felt everywhere. And it's an artificial pain. Actually, Iran said in an agreement a few weeks ago on a ceasefire that the strait would open. And then the United States put on a blockade, even after the ceasefire. This is a kind of craziness of the United States. And I should add one point to Seyed's perfect description of the mindset in Washington. Since the United States is a global empire, it can't admit to being weak or to losing. So even when the facts are clear, they have to fake it, because to show that they have a limit is to expose their weakness to everybody. And so Trump, even when they know they don't have a solution, he makes demands every day. He makes threats every day. He says how the United States will win every day. This is partly the illogic of empire. you're always trying to prove something. You're always trying to prove something against the facts, actually. And so this is what makes this situation even more difficult. I would add one more point to the American mindset, by the way, which is that because the United States is an empire and because Iran regained its sovereignty from the American empire, the US is out for revenge. And this goes back all the way to 1953, of course, when the United States overthrew a democratic government in Iran and imposed a police state. And that police state lasted for 26 years. And then the Iranian people threw off the police state. From the point of view of the empire that had imposed that police state, that was a true offense. That was proving that one could resist the American empire. And again, in the logic of empire, you're always out to prove a point, not only to the specific adversary or counterpart, but to the rest of the world. We are the most powerful. We can never be defeated. We can do what we want. We can make demands of others. Of course, such claims are irrational, even delusional, especially in our multipolar world. The United States cannot impose what it claims to impose, but it aims to pretend that it can, because that is core to its imperial logic. It has to scare everyone else too. Of course, this doesn't work anymore. This may have worked 10 or 20 years ago, even though many people had their doubts. But in today's world, with the power of Russia, with the power of China, with the ability of Iran to show we can retaliate, you can't beat us. The idea that the United States runs the show is demonstrably false. And my point as an American every day is it's completely self-defeating for America. I live on a street where there's crime, where the garbage needs to be picked up, where the infrastructure is broken down, where we have things to do, frankly, that we should be paying attention to. We shouldn't be paying attention to bullying Iran. What a waste of time for us. What a useless idea. What a cruel, illegal, and stupid idea also, because it can't work. But the point I'm making inside my country is that it's self-defeating for us because we have things to do. Help our kids go to school, help the roads to work properly, help the infrastructure to be modernized to the 21st century, not to waste trillions and trillions of dollars of bullying other people. But to come back to your fundamental question about the Strait of Hormuz, this is a very important fact that the whole world economy is suffering now. And there is no answer other than for the strait to be opened. And that means for the United States to leave. And yes, Iran and Oman, by the way, will control their waterways because this is a waterway between two sovereign countries. And they will regulate it, but it is in Iran's interest that the strait should be open for international commerce. And that's how it would be. So if the US leaves, we could get back to some kind of normal. What I don't believe is possible is to settle all of the other issues between the US and Iran, partly because the US has many delusions, cruel delusions about Iran that Seyed has already talked about. Iran, for 25 years, has said, we don't want a nuclear weapon, and the US keeps bombing Iran, claiming that it does. This is a kind of insanity of the United States, a lie. There was an agreement on the nuclear reached 11 years ago, and the US ripped it up, not Iran. Iran followed every principle of that agreement scrupulously, and then Trump ripped it up. So this is the problem. What I say about those issues is fine. Someday they can be negotiated, but not now in this crazy environment where the United States doesn't even know how to send a professional negotiator, just a son-in-law or a business partner. Yeah, these are technical issues, and the United States doesn't treat them in that way. So all of the longer-term issues, in my view, need to be put off till there's quiet, till there's peace, till there's mutual respect. But the short term, the United States should leave, lift the blockade, and Iran would reopen the strait because it's in everybody's interest, Iran's as well as its neighbors and the whole world. And so there's an easy solution. It doesn't even need an agreement. It doesn't even need an MOU. It doesn't need a treaty. It just needs the United States to pull back, and that's enough.
Okay. Professor Marandi, I have a question about a relation between petrodollar and a hegemony of US dollar in the world.
Professor Sachs, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the policies of the United States, ever since we entered the unipolar moment after the collapse of the Soviet Union, instead of being one where the United States sits back and takes advantage of this opportunity and benefits from it economically, being the center of commerce and business and trade, it immediately began to try to impose its will on the rest of the world and become the hegemon that dictates terms to everyone. And ultimately, as a result, it began sanctioning country after country, of course, attacking countries, destroying countries. And gradually, as a result, both because of the deficit of the United States, the endless wars that it began carrying out, especially since 9/11, the United States has encouraged countries to begin to seek solutions to protect themselves from the U.S. financial system, from the U.S. military threats. So they began to seek means to protect themselves through alternative systems of commerce, moving away from the dollar. And with Iran, for example, in the case of Iran, gradually the United States began imposing more and more sanctions. Under Obama, we had the maximum pressure sanctions, and that, for a period of time, really cornered Iran. It made life very difficult for the Iranians, and the Iranian government was really facing troubling times managing its affairs. But the problem with the United States is that once it began using this tool, it started using it against other actors. And then, for example, the Russians, and then to the Chinese. And so ultimately what it did was it brought about countries thinking collectively, increasingly thinking collectively about alternatives to the US dollar and US financial institutions. And in my opinion, this war has contributed to that immensely because, first of all, the petrodollar is, as you know much better than I, you're an economist and I'm a layman, the petrodollar is founded upon the oil trade, and now the oil trade has been significantly reduced, and the role of the Persian Gulf Arab regimes has been diminished. Even if we go back to something similar to the normal situation before the war, it will never be normal again, in my opinion. I think that many of these countries will begin rethinking their alliances, at least to a degree, thinking more about better relations with China and Russia and perhaps Iran to protect themselves from the United States. And this is going to further erode the role of the US dollar. So in my opinion, this process of the dollar gradually being undermined which began, I think, soon after the unipolar moment with sanctions and wars and deficits and neoliberalism. Ultimately, because of this war, it's going to the decline is going to move forward much faster, and I think countries are going to countries in BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or other global institutions or organizations. They're going to move forward at a faster pace to find alternatives to protect themselves. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that in the long term, this war not only has diminished the U.S. Prestige militarily and has, again, hit it hard morally. Of course, this Gaza had already done that. But I think economically, it's going to have a major negative impact on the United States. The oil crisis and energy crisis and LNG crisis and the global economic crisis that all countries are going to experience as a result of what's happening today. That aside, I think that the petrodollar is going to be adversely affected, and thus, in this respect, the United States is going to face a much more difficult future as well. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor.
If I may add to that, I agree with all of it. I would say the following. Iran faces two economic pressures from the United States. One is the U.S. has seized Iranian assets over the years, many billions of dollars. This is a kind of outright theft, and Iran should be pursuing legal measures to restore those assets. The U.S. has no justification whatsoever in this blatant theft. Second is the U.S. sanctions, which again are unilateral, dictated by the United States, saying that businesses around the world cannot do business with Iran, and if they do, they get punished. So the question for Iran is what to do about both of these issues. And what is the cost to Iran of these measures that the U.S. has taken? Well, first of all, I am somewhat skeptical that the United States is going to release Iran's funds with or without negotiations, because this is a game played by the United States, a cat and mouse game. There's promises are made, and then Iran will do something, and then the promise won't be fulfilled. So I'm not convinced that anything that is really under discussion would actually be honored. But I would also say the following couple of points. First, the money involved that has been stolen is significant, but not huge. So Iran should not twist itself out of shape to recover these funds, because they're not a large proportion of Iran's national income. They're only a modest proportion. Again, it's illegal what the United States has done. It's self-defeating from my point of view for the reasons that Seyed explained, because it weakens the trust in the United States by everybody, and they find alternatives. But it's not so much money in any event that Iran should somehow sacrifice more fundamental security issues or anything else for that. Second, when it comes to sanctions, first, the United States is not a market for Iran. Iran sells overwhelmingly to Asia, especially to China. So closing the U.S. market to Iran is meaningless. It has no impact on Iran. Iran's trade partners will be Russia, China, India, the Southeast Asian countries, and so forth. So the U.S. market is irrelevant for Iran, really irrelevant. Then the question is, can Iran live with U.S. sanctions? My answer is yes, because Iran has already found ways around the U.S. sanctions, and because China and others don't want the U.S. to unilaterally dictate global trade. And the China has already said very clearly, we buy Iranian oil, whether the United States says so or not. The trick is to get the receipts for these sales, not in dollars, but in renminbi or in other ways. This is perfectly straightforward, I have to tell you, as an economist. This is not complicated. There is no reason in the world why Iran's trade with China needs to have anything to do with US dollars, period. And there's nothing that Iran needs in the world from world markets that the United States uniquely provides, or even the United States and Europe, by the way. Anything Iran needs, as far as I am aware, you can buy in China, probably cheaper, probably higher quality. And it's not only China, it's dozens of countries around the world that provide alternatives. So frankly, I have been a critic of American sanctions policy for a quarter century on the grounds that it is self-defeating as well as illegal. I've said it doesn't even work for America, much less being illegal. And when it comes to Iran, if I may say so, Iran's real economic partners are China, Russia, and other countries. Work with them, find non-dollar payments solutions, be pragmatic, but I don't believe personally that the US dollar hegemony, so-called, or the US sanctions really are a stranglehold over Iran anymore. I think that's passé. I think what Seyed said is exactly right. Iran found other ways, and those other ways are being improved every day. And so there are ways to do trade without the dollar. There are ways to trade without the US markets, either as suppliers or buyers. And the amounts that the United States illegally confiscated are just not so large that Iran should regard those as somehow a desperate issue for current negotiation. Though I do think Iran should say, just like Russia and others that have suffered confiscation by the United States, that's illegal. You can't do that. That's our money and we want it back. That for sure. But I don't think it's an amount so large that it really is somehow urgent for Iran to make concessions that it otherwise would not make. And when it comes to the difficulties in the Iranian economy, which are real, of course, they need to be managed, and Iran needs partners. China, it needs as an economic partner, definitely. It needs Russia as an economic partner. It needs other countries as partners with their agreement to find ways around the dollar settlements system.